Mike Laske just moved back to Michigan from Chicago, so we're glad to have you here, and you're passionate about data science and visualization. So thanks for coming and presenting.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm not sitting in a room with a brick wall painted white and some flowers, but I did move to Michigan and we're still trying to even get settled in. So it's a little bit of a disaster behind me. But yeah, it's been great moving back to Michigan because I was born and raised here. And yeah, it's been just great being back near some friends and family that I grew up with. So I will start by saying that I'm certainly not a Python expert, since I'm like self-taught. So I wasn't a computer science major either. But I work, in my job, I work with data a lot. I work with analytics, and I've since tried to find different ways to use Python to do more, either be more efficient in terms of data analysis, or in the case of what we'll see with Dash here today, creating dashboards and essentially sharing data visualizations in a better way than what I was accustomed to at my company. We'll go through some examples of that. But oftentimes I was creating, I would take a file with data in Excel, maybe create a few basic bar charts or line charts or scatter plots, and you'd send it off through an email as an attachment. And there were, beyond just not really being that complex, but it was, then the data gets static. And I thought, well, maybe there's a way that you can create like dynamic dashboards that are better ways to visualize data. And that's when, just through a search on Google and Stack Overflow, I found this tool called Dash. So what Dash is used for is to create dashboards in Python, and it's built on top of Flask, which I think we might have talked about in a past presentation, but it's essentially a very easy way, easier than building something from scratch. It has a lot of tools already built in it to create dashboards that get served through the web, and then you can deploy it, sort of solving that like static file problem. Data can be dynamically updated in real time. So in addition to the data being updated in real time, it also allows people to connect and interact with dashboards. And I'll show some examples of how, what I mean by like interacting and what that looks like. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. Rather than kind of starting with a blank slate and building it out, I want to show you what a finished product looks like first, just so we all are kind of talking about the same thing in terms of like what a dashboard is and how it works. So let's just kind of show you the end result, and then we'll go back to the beginning and walk through some examples of how they're built and how they work. So if we start with baby names, I'm going to show an example here in a second of what a large data set looks like. The Social Security Administration provides this data set. It's public, and it has every baby that was born in the U.S. It has their name registered since 1879. So if I think you go to some government's website and you can pull a file like this, I've zoomed in to make it a little bit easier to see, but it's a pretty big data set. I think there's over 600,000 rows. And as I'm just sort of casually scrolling through this, you can see there's pretty much 4 basic columns. So it's the year that the entry was made, starting, well, in this case, my file starts in 1910. It's alphabetical here, so it starts with A, and then it goes, it'll that end with Z. But it's just a really big file, right? So let's just stop in the middle, and the name Rosa in 1976 was given to 1,136 female babies. So let's just say let's just leave that at that. Okay, so it's a big data set. Now let's talk about popular culture. So pop culture is always impacted society in interesting ways, and I'll take a guess here that everybody on this call has heard of Game of Thrones, but just in case you haven't, it's a TV series that was on HBO, and it's got a lot of loyal, active fans. So you could ask a question, has Game of Thrones inspired baby names in recent years? So like I kind of said, we're going to start with just a finished product. This is what a code would look like. It's not very complex. You can see this entire code is only going to be 63 rows. Later, I'm going to get into how we bring in the data, what the app looks like, what the layout is, what a callback is, but let's just actually look at it. Let's just say, let's take that data set and run it. And so I did that before we started. And so that script that you just saw as a starting point provides this little basic layout. Like there's nothing here. Now, behind the scenes, this is connecting to that spreadsheet. I'll exactly go through in the script how that's done, but just for the purposes of what we're going to see here, that's the case. So just, you can see I had two pictures here. Again, for those that maybe be less familiar with the show, this is Arya Stark, and this is the Queen Sansa Stark. They are two characters in the show. Arya was very popular in the show, and I guess like she had a lot of fans. So we could say, now that we have this data set, did her name maybe get more popular? Did more parents start naming their baby girls Arya after the show started? So what we can do is open up this data set or this drop down here, and we're going to select the name Arya. And what it does is it essentially retrieves that data set that we saw a minute ago and it plots it kind of in a dynamic way here, right? So actually before 1980, so for decades and decades, there wasn't a single baby girl named Arya. In the 1980s, you could see, for some reason in 1982, there were 5 girls named Arya. And you can see as I kind of hover over each year, but just as Game of Thrones took off, we can see the name Arya ended up getting much more popular. And by 2016, there were nearly 2,000 baby girls named Arya. So her sister was named Sansa. So we can actually just plot Sansa on top of Arya and hit enter. And unfortunately, despite Arya's fame, Sansa never quite received that same fanfare. Maybe she was just less popular of a character. Apparently there were 5 baby girls in 2015 and 6 in 2016 that were named that, but right, there's just not much, it's not like Arya took off, right? She was just less popular of a character than Arya. Now just, again, maybe we want context, right? Like 1930 or 1,935 baby girls were named Arya in 2016. Is that popular or not? So let's go to our favorite host. Let's type in Daniel and his name and actually see what that looks like. And it's like, whoa, okay. I mean, Arya actually looked really popular, but compared to Daniel, and Daniel, I must say your name is trending to become less used. I think Michael, my name's the same way, but after
I was born right at that peak too.
Yep, you and me both. So actually, I didn't prep this. I'll throw my name on too. We'll just see. We'll just see what happens here. Okay, similar peaks, but the message I was going to say is, you start to even get context that Arya actually, despite growing in popularity, is still a little bit less popular than a name like Daniel. So the few key takeaways here, right, are we started with just a basic spreadsheet with 4 columns. Like it wasn't much. And through a very short script, we were able to now take a few names, kind of look at trends over time, have it be dynamic and so forth. So that was just a way of looking at what a dashboard, a dash app or a dashboard can do. And we just looked at baby names with a file of 600,000 rows to do that. So let's hop back into our sheet here. Okay. So yes, I would say it was, those Game of Thrones did have an impact, would be my conclusion. So dash apps, like I said, they're pretty simple. They're pretty much composed of 2 parts. So essentially, once you have that data set, what you do is you're gonna define the layout. So you just want to describe what the app looks like. And in that case, it was pretty simple. It was just a single line chart that showed trends over different time periods. And then what we really didn't see, what we saw is called a callback, and a callback is the interactivity of that. So the callback is going to say, once we have the layout, we're going to essentially kind of connect the data in a way that we can be interactive with it. And that's how we chose a name like Arya, Sansa, or Daniel. That's called a callback. And I'll go through some examples of how that's done. So just to, let's even start with something really simple that's even shorter code, but just to, to quickly reiterate here, like the the basic steps to create a simple dashboard are, first, you just want to collect the data. So in our case, I found it from a government website, but it could be any data set that you want. I will also mention, it doesn't have to be an Excel file or a CSV. If we have time at the end, I will show how to connect one through like an online API. So the data is getting fed into the Dash app in real time. You choose the design layout. So we'll go over what HTML components are and how to create a figure. You can choose the chart. So in that case, there was a line chart that we just showed. We'll add components. So I'll show you how you can get creative with kind of making adjustments and modifications to the charts that you picked. And then we'll run it. It's not that complex in the grand, it's not that complex a code as we just saw in that case. So let's do a very simple one, because that'll be a good way to build out the code. So just a quick story here. So Old Faithful is a geyser located in Yellowstone. And the takeaway here is that maybe some data scientists or somebody in the field figured out that Old Faithful is it has a range essentially from 44 to 125 minutes. So a little bit less than an hour to almost over 2 hours, and the mean or the average is about 90 to 92 minutes. But it's bimodal, so it has 2 eruption durations. So the duration is long or short, and short eruptions lead to an interval of just over an hour, and long eruptions lead to an interval of about 1.5 hours. So just with that little bit of background, maybe somebody this was their hypothesis and they wanted to test it. So what we'll do is we will bring in kind of a blank slate here, and we'll build this one from scratch so we can actually see how this is done in real time. So I just use PyCharm. Again, this could be done in any, I think any text IDE or text file tool, I guess. I know there's a word for it, but okay. So similar to the Game of Thrones or the baby names, this has 3 columns. So you're just going to see it has a column of D, a column of Y, and a column with X. So the first thing we want to do is let's just quickly identify. So D is just going to be the number of the recordings. Again, this is just our notes. I've commented them out. X is the duration of the current eruption, and Y is the waiting time. So this is marked as the date with the month. We then have the duration. So this would be like 78 minutes. And then the waiting time. So it's 4. Again, we have a data file. Let's see if we can do some cool things with visualizing it. So there are a few imports that we want to bring in for starters. So Dash is a there's this like the module Dash here. So we'll bring that in, and then we're also going to bring in something called Dash core components that we'll see what those do. Those are the components that make things interactive. And then we'll see some HTML components. I mentioned at the beginning, you don't need to know HTML. It's certainly not my strength, but there's some sort of pre-built HTML components that can help you kind of spice it up and make the visuals look better without needing to code like the HTML stuff on your own. And there's just Dash is connected with Plotly, if anybody's familiar with that, and that helps create the charts. And then there's Pandas, which is for data analysis. So we'll bring in the 2 steps that you essentially do right off the bat. So you essentially create this new variable called an app, and just app, and then it's dash dot dash, and then open and close parentheses. We're going to bring in that data set. So through Pandas, we'll do a read CSV, and we're just going to retrieve that data set that I just showed you. The next thing we'll do is we're going to create a Dash layout. So I'm going to bring this in here. So we're going to define the layout, and we essentially create a div container here. And we're going to create a graph. So it's this DCC is connected. It's the Dash core components, which we've essentially labeled as DCC. And so one of the core components for DCC is graph. What we do is we give it an ID, and then we're going to define what the figure is. So in this case, what we're going to do is create a scatter plot. So before we looked at a line chart, this is where we'll say scatter. For Go, again, that's bringing in this plotly graph objects here, and scatter is one type of chart that's available. We're going to define what the X and the Y are, and the mode is markers. And then what we'll do is, so X and Y are just to kind of keep this simple here. That's just the headers in the file. We'll give it, I mentioned you can add some, things with like the title, the colors, the axes, what happens when you hover over a data point. So we'll just we'll give it a title here. We'll label the X-axis and the Y-axis. And then we'll give this a hover mode as closest, which means that when we scroll over the scatter plot, the points in the scatter plot, it will, whatever one we're closest to, it'll show us the label for. And then last but not least, we bring in what's called the server clause, so it'll just allow us to run this. I'm actually just going to make sure of one thing real quick. Okay, so let's go back to okay. So here we go. This is our file. This was kind of building it out step by step here. So let's just quickly do a recap. We showed what was in the file. So there were just 3 columns. We brought in our imports. We launched the application. We're going to retrieve the data frame and just give it, call it DF. We're going to define the layout, and through that, this is just something that it takes time. You have to go into the guides or like the methodology white papers and go figure out like what your options are. But the general template of this is pretty simple. Like, and if you wanted a line chart instead of scatter, you could just change that here, and then you change a few of the parameters. But this is really all it takes. And one thing we can do now is we can run this. So we are going to run this, and we'll just give this a second here. So it's running. So what I'll do is I'm just going to launch this, and what it'll do is pop it over into an internet browser, and we can see the results. So the each of these each point is a different eruption. And the x-axis is the duration, and then the y-axis is the interval to the next eruption. So this is just a really easy way to say, okay, our hypothesis was right in this case. There is a correlation, or it appears there at least seems to be a correlation here between an eruption's duration and then the expected wait to the next eruption. So if there is a short duration, it's just like a quick eruption. It won't be as long till the next one. But if it's a very long eruption, like let's just say one of them's 5 minutes, it's much more likely going to be a longer time period that you have to wait and stand around and I don't know, text your friends, do whatever you want, and wait until you see the next one if you were a visitor. So that's an example of what just again we're taking a data set here. We kind of had this hypothesis on, we had these intervals and the data with the durations. And while theoretically, and I would have done this in old life, I probably would have gone into Excel and just done like insert, highlight the data, insert chart. You can probably start to, imagine some of your own ways to apply this tool. And it's essentially a nice like dynamic way to display data. In this case, we just did it with Old Faithful. So
Mike, can you show the hover part of it?
Yeah, so the hover,
got it.
Yeah, so I think the next example that I'm going to show has more. This is kind of like my bare bones one. Like this is, the data set was 3 columns, but this is like kind of just a very easy way to show like how. So all this is like the X and then the Y. So this is after there was this one geezer here that was 5.1 minutes in terms of duration, the X, but then it was 91 minutes after that till the next one. So the moral of the story was we were like just trying to see if there was like essentially a correlation or a trend line here, and it does appear that that's the case.
Hey, Mike, there was another question in chat.
Sure.
Mauricio asked, does Dash provide tools components for generating tabs? For generating text? Tabs.
Oh, it does. That's kind of like the Dash 201. I've done tabs with one project I was working on, but yeah, you can essentially have it where Yeah, there are 2 tabs. I unfortunately don't have it. One of my examples doesn't show the tabs, but it can be done. You know what? You actually just, Dan, if I forget, will you remind me at the end? Will you ask that question again at the end? Because there's there's something I can show, but I got to dig it up for a second.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so let's okay, so yeah, that's that was just a very simple example. I have this font huge, so it takes a little so everybody could see it. But again, it's pretty basic here. Oh, I'm sorry, this was the first one. So this was, we're going to come back to this at the end because it's more complex. But this was the example here of what we just did. So let's now, these were kind of basic projects. This was something that I was really interested in doing. So let's build out a new one. This one will be more complex. This is going to show us stock performance in real time. Now, I will preface this by saying we'll go through an example. This one does not have an Excel file. So we are going to, this is kind of taking things to the next level. We are going to connect to an API here. So the API is going to have updated stock prices. And I know the market's absolutely got slammed today. So maybe we'll see what happens with some of these. But as we go through this, you'll notice I'm not bringing in a data frame through like a CSV file like we did in the first 2. This is going to connect to an API again that has real-time stock price data. And so we're just going to kind of connect to that. And then what we'll do is we'll have our graphs update to that connected data. So what we'll do is let's start having fun with some of this stuff. So the first thing is we want to bring in our imports. So right off the bat, these are some similar imports. We've talked about Dash is just the main, the first thing we want to import. Core components and HTML components are different ways that we can, bring in graphs and whatnot. HTML is going to help with the layout. This is new here. So this is called Dash dependencies and input, output, and state. So this is going to help us, in this case, create these callbacks. For the we touched on callbacks briefly here, but it's just they're gonna help us connect and interact with the dashboard. And input, output is pretty self-explanatory. State is something I'll explain, where you make it so like if you update 3 inputs, they don't update until you click the button, and that's what the state will do, is it allows you to dictate when the update happens instead of just always happening the moment any input changes. Date time is just something that's going to help us with look at stock prices over time. Pandas, and then these other 2 are new here. So Pandas data reader is going to help us import the data, and what we're going to do is we're going to connect to Y Finance. This is for Yahoo Finance, and this is Yahoo Finance makes their API available. I think you register and you got to like put your name in API key, but it essentially allows us to, without paying anything, get real-time data for free. So let's go through, this is going to start with the same build. So the first thing we're always going to want to do is define the app, which is, it always just looks like this. The one thing we have to do in this case is we have to first, this isn't that important, but we have to do it in this case. We have to bring in a list of the tickers. So for those that are already familiar with stocks and finance, you'll know this already, but I'll explain it anyway. So the ticker is essentially a symbol. It's typically 4 or 5 characters, and it's assigned to each company name. And so we'll go through an example in a second, but the ticker for Tesla that we'll see is TSLA, but it's just a symbol. So what I've just done is in a separate file, I brought in an investment symbol list that I've stored. We're gonna set this as the index called symbol, and then we're gonna run a for loop that's gonna essentially match the symbols that we have to the data that's retrieved. It's not that important, but it was something I figured out that was necessary. So let's start with, let's just type this in. So let's define our layout next. So it's kind of the same process as before. So the first thing I want to do is, well, I'll just bring it in just to be and then we'll go through it line item by line item. So the layout is, it's going to start with that HTML div. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to put in H1. So you'll see in the documentation that H1 it's essentially like a big header, a header one or a title. So at the top of our new dashboard, it's just going to say, right, let's actually call it stock performance dashboard. Next to that, we're going to see something called enter tickers, and I just added some padding. Padding is just gives us some space, and then around the bubble where we're going to enter in the tickers we want to see. And then this is going to be similar to the Game of Thrones example, where I've added one of those DCCs, which is the core component that's provided by Dash, and they have essentially a pre-built drop-down tool. So it's that earlier we saw when we started names, like the full list of names appeared. So the drop-down will appear, and that helps when you have like a set list of choices. You can just see what that list is. You have to give any DCC an ID, so I'm just calling it my ticker symbol. We'll see what options are in a second. The value is, all the value does is it's going to be like the default setting. So like the first value that's going to be in the drop down, I've just put Tesla, TSLA, which I just mentioned a second ago, is Tesla. And then we'll see multi-true. Multi-true is for multiple. And this was also seen earlier when we already had like Arya and Sansa, and we added Daniel. Rather than just having one at a time, if you put multi-true, it lets you choose multiple variables all at once. This gets into, I get over my shoes a little bit. Like I mentioned at the start, I'm certainly no expert. I just, use Stack Overflow and Google to kind of figure out how to like do different types of style. And there's different ways to build different like blocks, or you can do different alignment, but I definitely don't claim to be an expert, but if you are, you can definitely get creative and get much more complex here with how your page is styled. What we'll do is we'll add another div in here. And so in addition to choosing the stock, so we saw there was a drop down earlier with the stock, I'm going to add another DCC. So this is our second one, and this is going to be called, it's a pre-built component, and it's offered by Dash, and it's called the date picker range. So you guys I don't want to bore you guys, so I will go through it, but it's like kind of the same flow as before. Like we have to give it an ID, and that ID is this is important for later. We're going to see in a second, when we connect the data back to the core component, this ID is what we're going to use. We are through the date picker range. You can set a few different, variables. So you can set the min date. So we'll look at, we could choose different time periods. Where we'll go back about 6 years ago and start at 2015 as what's allowed. And then as like the default start date, we'll just go back essentially like a couple years ago and look at 2019 as our default. These can, if you're good, you can see I started to try to get creative here with making this more dynamic than hard coding a year. But I just didn't have time to do that. There is a way to do it. I just wasn't able to figure it out. And then the end time today. So no matter when we run this, this is really cool because it'll always update through the current day. So we have a few more style options here, and you can see I'm now adding an HTML. So the HTML is different than a core component that we saw with a drop down and a date picker. HTML, again, it's more like the layout, related to the layout and the actions here. So we're going to define a button, has an ID. End clicks just tracks like how often so we'll start like nobody's clicked it until we actually do for the first time. So we just start at 0. It's going to submit our action. So you can kind of see where we're going here, right? Like we're going to pick a stock, we're going to choose the date, and then we're going to have this button here that will submit. And I've just added, again, very simple stuff here. Like we're like the font pretty big here in 24, and we'll add a little margin so it's off the side of the web page. Now, let's just keep going. And then finally, there's going to be this graph. So the graph it has an ID, and we'll get into some options at the graph. Okay.
And Mike, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
There's apparently a lot of capability in the DCC components or elements encompass a lot. Did you find the best documentation to look for all these families and capabilities?
Yeah, so let's, I did. So let me.
Not that you have to talk about that now. I don't want to disrupt your flow.
No, it's fine. It's actually a good time. But yeah, that you are correct. Okay, I hit my bookmarks here. So Dash, the one thing Dash is known for is it has a phenomenal community, and okay, here we go. It has a phenomenal community and great documentation. So I would say it's called dash.plotly.com. And so there's really good tutorials in here in terms of just like kind of how to set it up. We're just going to go into callbacks. So your question was right on point. This tab here is for core components. So I'm going to work my way there. These are just things that I bookmarked though, which is why I was able to bring them up so quick. There's a kind of like a message board where people ask questions. I have some posts in here over time. And so here's the core components. So you can see on the left over here, there's a lot. I've used the range slider a few times where it's like, it's something like one of these things because I think it's a kind of a cool way to like look at steps. So this is like an example with temperature. If like you wanted to look at something that was between a certain temperature range. And not only that, it gives you the exact code that you can, so like you can just almost like copy and paste this in, but hopefully this is like just one example of like the phenomenal community. Again, we saw DCC, here's HTML options. So in ours, we saw a button, right? That's what we just went through in my code. And you can see like, this almost looks identical right here to what we were looking at. Where was my button? Right here. So it's actually like, I was going to say that at the end, but I am glad you asked. Like it's beyond just, if you can like kind of recognize that there's a lot of like general like templates it's really easy to use this and build it out.
Thanks.
Oh, here's the question. Can you create a multi-page application? So you can make a dashboard and yeah, you can have it have multiple pages on it. But Dan, yeah, if I have time at the end, I'll come back to that because there's actually a good example I've seen that can show that. Okay, where were we? We were at the button. Okay, so now we want to get into the callback. So let me just bring this in here. So the callback is, now that we have the layout, right? We have the data because we've connected to the API. We have kind of built this layout with this date picker and names. We're going to do the callback. So definitely reference the documentation. I don't want to, bore anyone, but like essentially this layout, it's always like the same. So you kind of choose what the output is. And remember a minute ago, I said those IDs to come back. Well, all it is we're going to take, okay, so the DCC graph has an ID of my graph. So we just put that as the output. And then it's a figure essentially. So we put figure here. Submit button was our input. So that was up here. Right here. So the ID for our HTML button was submit button. So it's pretty easy. Like, and then state I mentioned this a few minutes ago. It allows us to make changes, but it's like we can change the ticker and change the start date, and we can change the end date, and it won't update it until we hit the input. You don't need state. You can set it up. This was the case with the baby names. That like no matter what name I put in, like we had a Daniel and it just updated. In the case we'll see here, we're gonna add some stocks and some dates, and it won't automatically update until we hit submit. And that's only because these are identified as state, not inputs. So after that, again, we put a function in here that's gonna update the graph, the variables that it's gonna find, and just this is just like part of the function. But again, we're gonna define the start time, the end time, and then we're gonna, here's where I'm essentially defining that data frame. So we're gonna go to get data Yahoo, get the ticker, we'll do some traces, but like all we need to know here is like, yeah, it's just a function that's going to help us update the dashboard for us. Okay, a lot of code there. Let's have a little bit more fun. So let's look at like a real-time update. So let's just run this. Okay, so it's going to run. And okay, we're going to launch this. So here we go. Okay, So we were earlier, right? We were up here in the code. We said like, just as a starting point, we're gonna have a header. So stock performance dashboard is our H1. That was the big header. Underneath it, we'll have an H3, which just means a smaller header. It says enter tickers. And then we're gonna have our options, and the value is Tesla. So it's just gonna be our starting point. Like that, it doesn't do anything else except it's like, where are we gonna start? Then we get to date picker. Date picker, again, we set a start date default as the beginning of 2019, and we said run through today. So that's gonna run through today, or that's our start date and end date. And then we see the graph. So what we can do is look at this price of Tesla over time. And so let's just go through an example. So another big company like Tesla is Apple, right? And so we've added Apple. Now, unlike the baby names, nothing's going to happen until we decide to hit submit because of that state. And so Apple is the mark of consistency. So while Tesla stock is very volatile. It goes up and down a lot. And we see this. Ultimately, it's been, any investment in Tesla has done great. Apple has still increased over time, but it's just much more smooth sailing than something that we would see in that we saw from Tesla, which is definitely one of the more volatile stocks. A lot of variation, like people in finance would say, like it's got a lot more risk, but ultimately it's been successful. Well, at least until 2021, it's had a little bit of a dip, but that's just an example of two stocks side by side. So let's be topical here and bring in Gamestop. So Gamestop is I don't even know how to describe it, like a video game retailer. They're typically in shopping malls. They sell video games, sell consoles, but a lot of hedge fund investors thought the company was like essentially going to go bankrupt. So they essentially made bets called short positions, but they made bets that like GameStop was going to lose money. And a lot of people on Reddit essentially rallied and like started buying the stock. And when the stock was being bought by many people, it was pushing the price of the stock up. Long story short, this all happened like a month ago, but let's just see if we're able to capture it on this dashboard. So in this case, maybe we don't need to go back to 2019. Let's just go to the start of this year. So here's a good example though of like, again, maybe just in real time. Like I don't know much about like the JavaScript and all the other stuff, but like all I had to do was choose date picker, and it kind of gives me this nice calendar here where I can dynamically type in the date. It kind of brings this up. We'll hit the first. Sure, that looks great. Let's hit submit. So we have GameStop and submit, and that story that I just mentioned kind of is visualized here. So at the beginning of the year, like nothing was really happening. This is just the dollar amount or the price of GameStop, and then kind of like out of nowhere, and really for no good reason, the price went up to $347 at its peak on January 27th. So if you were an investor in GameStop, it was awesome. You made a lot of money. But unfortunately, over time, it was short-lived and the stock sort of came back down to reality. So hopefully that was like just, a little bit of a different way in this case, right, where we didn't have an Excel file. We linked directly to an API on Yahoo Finance that has data all the way through today. As we can see here kind of at the end. We've kind of made it dynamic both with, we were typing in names, but you can also see like a drop down. Just maybe I'll mention it quickly, like these are the tickers on the left that I brought in, and then we merge it with the names of the that are in Yahoo Finance. We added a date picker, we choose submit, and then we can see the closing prices of GameStop and a visual that essentially tells that story for us. Okay, let me just add one thing and then I'll stop and see if we have questions, because I was curious about this and I'm sure somebody's going to ask it, so I'll get out in front of it. Now, I'm running this like on my computer, right? Like we had the code in here. We were in here, we're running this essentially on my server. Can you deploy this to the web? And so everybody on this call can see it. And the answer is yes. So I've done this in the past using Heroku. It's Heroku. And so what it makes it, we're not going to go through it today, but if you are interested, especially if you get to a spot like this and you wanted to make this like public so anybody can use it. Heroku, again, it has to be limited in capacity. Like if you have 1 million viewers, I think Heroku will start charging you, but it is free. And it allows you to essentially take the code and then deploy it through Heroku to, so anybody, like it essentially gives it a website that anybody could go to. I believe the same thing is true of a company called DigitalOcean. I would love for somebody to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are a few companies that can let you deploy it and obviously not pay anything. Like as long as it's kind of a simple app, you can do it for free. But that's just not something we're seeing here, but it can be done through Heroku is just one example. So I will stop and see if we have any questions. Dan, I want to come back to that one. So while we're maybe getting a question or two, I want to dig up something that I can show for that previous question. But do you mind like asking one or two that somebody sent in?
Yeah, so Mauricio asked if this can be deployed in ArcGIS online environment as an app.
Good question. I was right. I knew somebody was going to ask about deploying it. I did guess correctly. Unfortunately, I'm not experienced. I don't know that one specifically. So I wish I could help you. I don't know, but I will say it does, from what I've seen online, and I've had some, I found it to be pretty easy doing it on Heroku. I would say if you kind of want to test it out, do it. It's not that hard. But I'm sorry, I'm just not familiar with that specific example.
So the next one is, can you display data updating in real time, like take in new data and then push old data off the edge, so to speak?
Yeah, so that'll just be, in this case, I guess, yeah, it's a good one. Well, this is back to baby names, because I was doing that one in a different virtual environment. But yeah, so in this case, like hopefully the example where we started with, we were starting using spreadsheets, right? Like that old faithful example was like static data. But yes, I think the question is, can you like link to dynamic data? And the answer is yes. So I guess in this case, right? Like this will like if we run this again tomorrow, the chart will look different because it'll then have today's data in. And then if we want, I guess, yeah, you could get creative with the start dates to push other data off the edge, I guess. But I will say if you have good questions like this, usually these things can be done, and it's like a pretty easy to use tool to kind of figure it out.
And then Andrew is asking how this differs from other data visualization tools like Seaborn or Matplotlib.
Okay, so from I have seen some things online that like sort of compare Dash and Seaborn, and it does seem like there's some similarities there. I honestly, I'm not sure. Some people seem to prefer Dash for some things and Seaborn for others, but I think they are pretty similar. From what I've gathered, I've used Matplotlib more for just creating charts, but less for a dashboard. I didn't even know it could be used to create dashboards, so that's cool. But in my experience, I tend to use Matplotlib more for just like kind of taking static data and creating bar charts, where I use Dash for dashboards. And I think Seaborn has some similar functionality, but I'm just less familiar with it.
Any other questions, anyone?
I have a couple basic questions.
Yeah, shoot. And Dan, I'm trying to find that.
Sorry, this is Python, not basic.
So I just wanted to say, is the callback?
I
Hello?
think your audio dropped out, Charlie.
Oh, sorry. Is the callback essentially a command to render the objects that you defined earlier?
Yeah, exactly. So in the case of the callback is really just connecting the input with the output, and then if we want to add the state, we can. But in some cases, right, with we looked at the old faithful, and the callback there was like it was as simple as it could be. So it's the input was, sorry, wrong code. Right, so, or sorry, yeah, you're right. This one didn't even have, the stocks has the callback. So yeah, it's just connecting the input to the output. Was this one? Yeah, so the baby names one was probably the easiest example, because with the baby names, all we did here with the callback was we just essentially defined the input, which was, again, this is always going to reference the ID. So we would select names up here. It's right here. This was in our dropdown. And then the output was the by year graph, which we saw here. Yeah, essentially this was like our output in this div. And then the dropdown was our input here. Everything else is, these are just like, it's just some options that I've added, or like a text placeholder. But ultimately, like, this is kind of the key part of the callback, is like, we're gonna connect the dropdown to the graph. And then when the input changes, so in the case like we added Daniel as a new value, essentially it goes, you run a function, and essentially in this case we'll update this is like the function update that it does. Does that
Thanks.
Does that
Yep.
answer your question?
Yep, perfect.
Okay.
And a while back, Plotly, maybe it was a couple of years ago, they required registration. Is that by the wayside now? You can just use it without registration?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you need to register.
Okay.
Sorry, that's my thoughts, but don't hold me to that. I think Plotly and Dash have like a professional and a basic service. So I think that for the professional, like they try to monetize it and charge and give, like, they're almost like consultants where they will build things. But I think at the most basic level, it's free and you don't have to register.
Thanks.
But let me show this, and this is like, if you are interested in taking the next step, and then I'll, because this also, Dan, this gets back to our question earlier. So Plotly Dash has this like sample gallery. So we saw 3 of them we saw 3 from me. And that was with baby names and Game of Thrones. And then we saw the Old Faithful. And then we saw the stocks. All like pretty basic. I found these to be much more complex, but they're essentially like free pre-built apps. So if anybody like has like a topic that they like have been thinking about, you can see like there's a ton of variety in here, and like this is crazy stuff. Like these are all built in very simple code of what I saw. And I'll just like, we'll bring up let's just bring this up and open it. So you can see like what this is just strictly built in Dash, and it's all like dynamic. And Dan, perfect time to do a callback, as we could say, with the tabs, right? So here's an example of a Dash with like 2 different tabs, or like 2 different pages. And you can kind of like, let's just like up this limit here to whatever, we'll hit update. And then like, I think it updates over here then. So this is obviously just this like basic example that's free and given to you, is much more complex than anything I just showed, but it's kind of a cool resource, and also like a nice way to get like ideas for what's possible. If anybody's interested in support vector machines, this is an example of like, I told somebody, or I mentioned earlier, I like the range slider. Like you can see this has no state. If anybody was taking notes, right? Like anytime I move these, the input's directly connected to the output. And you can see like, it's kind of anytime we make any change here on like the noise level or the sample size, the ROC curve, and then this chart here, as well as the confusion matrix, will update. And I mean, these are probably some really smart people that built this, because I don't even know what a radial basis function is. But anyway, it's kind of cool of like taking a data set and being able to do it, and all the code's available. So if you go to the gallery, right, like you can, for this one here, and you hit, I think there's usually like, this app source code is available in Python and R. So you can click this, and then it actually takes you to the code of how it's built. So that's like my takeaway is, my ideas were pretty simple, but if anybody's interested in kind of seeing 96 other kind of cool options for that, it's an option. I guess I'm not like really showing my screen. So Dan, were there any more questions in the chat that were?
No more questions in the chat. Anyone having any more questions for Mike?
I guess I would say, was it a few, it looks like you're pretty comfortable with this. Did that take 20 hours or 40 hours or, I mean, for you, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question. I think because it's not that complex, like I mean, they can be like you can make them much more complex, but for I mean, even the baby names one was pretty like it's kind of like I'd say like 20, 30 hours. Yeah, like because once you get a hang, I remember what I was like in your shoes, like this all really did look foreign, but like once you kind of spend some time and get familiar with it, it's all pretty much just got this like same basic framework, like bring in the data, just define the app, do the layout, do the callback, that's it. And yeah, like it takes a few hours, so maybe of work and a few examples to get used to it. But maybe it's also because the documentation's really, really good, that it allows, yeah, you can just quickly run it, bring in, and then run it, and you're good to go. While we were here, were there any other names, maybe on a closing note, that anybody wanted to see popularity look like?
Tom.
Okay, we got to go with Thomas, but yeah.
All right.
Okay, wow, actually interesting. Thomas was big during the baby boomers, right? And then
Back in the 50s.
yeah, huge. I mean, 50,000 essentially male babies, right? Not that long after World War II. And it's still hanging around, but it's maybe let's do one more and then we'll wrap it up. Any other names we want to compare to Tom? I see we got a chat here.
Gertrude?
Dweezil, we'll give it a shot. I don't know. Sorry, it's not in the database. Was it Gertrude? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, Gertrude.
Oh, hey, somebody, I don't know, 2016, somebody was trying to make a comeback and 5 babies were named that, but a name that seemed to fade quick as the 70s arrived. Okay, we'll give Charlie, we'll give you one more since Dweezil. Okay, here we go. Charlie, you got it. Freda. I think we have Thomas is too popular of a name. It's we have to get rid of it so we can rescale. But okay, so Freda, yeah, was pretty popular back in more like World War I. So well, anyway, we could play around with this. Again, all this is just from a quick CSV file and 60 lines of code to get to this. So it's not the most complex thing. If anybody's interested in creating a dashboard, I'd say give it a shot. And Dan, I don't know what the standard protocol is like. I'm happy to share everything that I showed today, or I can post it on GitHub, but whatever you think's best for the group, just to give them everything I showed today, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, posting on GitHub sounds great.
Okay.
Any other questions, anyone?
Just a thanks. Thanks for showing me this. This is eye-opening. I really am impressed.
I'd like to
Thanks,
second that. Thank
thanks
you.
for joining.
It was very well presented. I learned a lot from it, and I appreciate your taking the time to show it to us. Thank you.